Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and our Board of Directors, we want to thank you for joining us today for our conversation with Robert Kaplan of the Federal Reserve. But before we do that, I want to recognize our Chairman, Arnold Gasita, and several of the board members on this call who represent the banking industry. They include Paul Murphy, CEO of Cadence Bank, Scott Silvas of Fifth Third. Also on the call, joining us from our board of directors, we also have Mark Montgomery, formerly of BBVA and now with Amegy, and of course, Dave Stevenson of Amegy Bank. To all of our board members who are on the call today, we thank them for all of their contributions and time on this very important topic with the Federal Reserve Bank of Texas. I'm Dr. Laura Murillo, President and CEO of the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We thank you for joining us. We've been having these calls with a variety of different leaders, and today is a very important and timely one as it relates to our economy. We are also appreciative of the hundreds of people who have joined us on this call, and those include everything from CEOs, executives, young professionals, and Mr. Kaplan, some of your colleagues over at Harvard University are also joining us on this call today.
Good.
So my thanks to them. We have members of the media, local and national, including the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg on this call as well. So we thank them for joining us. We will begin by extending our thanks, of course, to the Federal Reserve Bank here in the Houston area and to all of their team, including Senior Vice President Darren Peschel. So thank you to the Federal Reserve folks here in Houston. I'd also like to, at this time, thank them for the opportunity to serve with you all on your Business Advisory Council to provide feedback that will be then translated, hopefully, into public policy opportunities and conversation. On that note, Mr. Kaplan, welcome and thank you so very much for joining us. We really appreciate that. And for folks who've not had the opportunity to get to know or meet Mr. Kaplan, he's a graduate of Kansas University. He's also has an MBA from Harvard University, where he served as an associate dean at the Harvard School of Business. He is an author of many very interesting books, so make sure you catch one of those when you can, and currently serves, as mentioned, as president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Mr. Kaplan, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, let's get started first of all. For folks, especially those who are young leaders in the university, et cetera, a quick recap of the magnitude and importance of the Federal Reserve Bank.
Well, there are 12 Federal Reserve districts in the United States. We're the 11th district. We have about 1,300 employees. You mentioned our Houston branch and Darren Peschel, but we've got a branch in Houston, San Antonio, and El Paso. And what we do, we supervise, we oversee all banks in throughout the United States. We conduct payment services throughout the United States. If you send a wire or electronic transfer, the Fed is an operator of that, and we oversee those markets. We have a big cash operation, big vaults, and cash distribution, which is still very critical. And what we're known for, probably more than anything else, though, is we have a very big economics and research department in this district and through all the Federal Reserve districts. And we meet 6 times a year, 8 times a year, every 6 weeks, 8 times a year formally, and that's called the Federal Open Market Committee. And through that Federal Open Market Committee, we set monetary policy for the United States.
Well, thank you for that update. And everyone wants to know a little bit more about the economy, of course. Everyone is wondering what you are seeing and what you can provide to them in terms of information as it relates to the economy.
So here's what's been going on this year. As everyone knows painfully well, we had a severe contraction in the second quarter. Yes. Probably about 32% annualized. As bad as that was, though, the economy probably bottomed out in April. It was a very severe but short downturn. We began to grow again in May. We began to grow again in June. That growth rebound probably stalled out a bit in mid-June with the resurgence of the virus. That stalling out probably lasted until August. This is nationwide I'm referring to.
Yeah.
And we probably saw a reacceleration after August. With all those fits and starts, it's our best judgment that third quarter GDP in the United States will rebound and grow by about 30% annualized. So decline of 32%, rebound of 30%. And we believe in the fourth quarter this year, we will have very healthy growth, probably between 6 and 8%. We'll likely end the year with an unemployment rate in the United States, something we believe between 7 and 7.5%. And for the year, the U.S. economy, our best estimate right now is the U.S. economy will likely have contracted by about 2.5%. Okay. We think growth in 2021, though, will continue to be strong. And our estimate right now is GDP growth will be in the neighborhood of 3.5% next year. That's above trend growth, and we'll continue to grind down the unemployment rate. Now, if you'd like, I can make a couple of comments on beneath the hood on what's going on, because this is unusual, this downturn in many ways. One of the ways it's unusual is normally when you have a severe downturn of say 32% in the second quarter, you would have a drop off in consumer income and consumer spending. And we would get the so-called recessionary effects, and meaning it affects every business and everybody starts cutting back because it hurts demand broadly.
Yes.
What's unusual about this pandemic is demand, consumer spending did not drop off. It stayed very solid and consumer income stayed solid. The reason for that is the fiscal support, in particular, unemployment benefits and generous unemployment benefits, which allowed people that had lost their jobs or lost income to still be able to make ends meet and spend. So that's one thing that's unusual. For those sectors, though, particularly in person-to-person contact industries, airlines, entertainment, restaurants, you can go up through the list, they lost income and they have not yet rebounded, many of them that I talked to, but the economy didn't lose that income. The income shifted to other sectors. Home improvement has been historically strong. Home prices have been very, very strong. People are spending on other things, but they're still spending. So that's number one thing that's unusual. And in your audience, there's probably businesses, some that are in person-to-person contact industries, and I think they'll likely say, boy, our businesses turned down and we really haven't recovered or even come close to recovering. And then there are other businesses where they're able to work remotely or use technology to still serve their customers.
Yeah.
And they may be telling you they're having an outstanding year and that demand has rebounded and they're doing very, very well. So that's very unusual in a downturn. The other way this is unusual is the way it's affecting the workforce and the population. If you've got college education or greater level of educational attainment, it's pretty likely, or it's more likely that you're able to work remotely successfully, and you're less likely to have lost your job and you're less likely to have lost income. If, on the other hand, you've got a high school education or less, it's much more likely you're in a job where you can't work remotely. You may more likely be in the service sector in a person-to-person contact industry, and you're not able to work from home. So you're far more likely to have lost your job and you're more likely to have lost income. And we're noticing in the demographic data, this is disproportionately affecting particularly Blacks, to some extent Hispanics, where they've disproportionately lost jobs. And it's a shame because going into this pandemic, we had seen the gap narrowing between overall unemployment and that of Blacks and Hispanics. The other thing we're seeing is, I mentioned the issue about if you're high school or less, this is disproportionately affected, as I mentioned, those with lower levels of education, but within that, it's hurt women more than men.
Yes. And
So
many women have decided to stay home because of schooling and daycare situations, et cetera. So women have absolutely been disproportionately affected negatively, as well as Hispanics in our region.
And we're seeing that in the data. And so that's unusual. In the Great Recession, as bad as it was, we didn't really see the gap between male and female. And leading up to the pandemic, women with high school or less education had disproportionately been gaining share. We've now moved backwards. And so I'd say I'll stop there. There's a lot I could talk about, but that kind of sets the table with some of the unusual features of this downturn.
Well, certainly on the call, we have members that are involved with us that are CEOs or executives at oil and gas companies. So certainly they want to hear a little bit from you regarding the energy industry.
Okay, so for those listening, as they know, we suffered not only a demand shock to the oil industry, but we suffered at the same time back in March a supply shock because Saudi Arabia decided to increase supply out of frustration that they were unable to come to terms with OPEC plus Russia. So we had both together. So we've had a dramatic increase in excess supply, excess inventory, to the point where for a while there was a worry that there would be even enough storage capacity to deal with all the excess supply. It's our best judgment at the Dallas Fed that U.S. production for the year will decline from about 12.8 million barrels a day to something like 10.5 to 10.75 million barrels a day by the end of the year. Big decline. And we think it will not be until the end of 2021 until all this excess inventory gets worked off. So in the meantime, not surprisingly, we're seeing lots of bankruptcies, restructurings, job loss, not only in production, but in the midstream sector. And then it's also because of lack of fuel demand and particularly airline jet fuel demand, it's also hurting the refinery sector. So it's really hurting the entire ecosystem. And so we can talk more about that as we in the Q&A, but we think the world is going to need fossil fuels for decades to come. But this has probably accelerated the getting to peak demand, and the world will still need a healthy Permian Basin and oil industry, even with growth and alternatives. But this is a capital-starved industry right now, and it's a very challenging time.
You, like many, have been a big proponent of wearing masks, social distancing, etc. What are your thoughts as it relates to the potential of closing down once again Texas and perhaps seeing what that impact will have on our economy?
So the issue with closing down, obviously, if it's necessary where the healthcare system is being overrun, states and cities may not have a lot of choice in it. But I've been pretty vocal. I think it's the kind of thing where there's certain high-risk activities you want to curtail, and you want to limit density indoors and those kinds of things. But we saw in March and April the devastating effect of a lockdown, where you just lock down everything. And so one of the reasons why I've been so vocal about wearing a mask is talking to epidemiologists. I'm convinced, and they're convinced, that if everyone wore a mask, it wouldn't eliminate this problem, but we would substantially mute the transmission of this disease. And that is a far better alternative, obviously, than the hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe trillions, that would be lost if we're forced to do broad lockdowns. So I've been a big proponent. Let's see what we can do to live with this virus. And I think we're going to be living with this virus, by the way, not for just a few months, even with a vaccine. I think we're going to have to learn to social distance, and we are, and wear masks, possibly for a good part of 2021.
Yes, and let's talk about the Houston area. How are we faring from the economy versus the rest of the country?
So obviously, Houston is, on the one hand, is disproportionately affected by weakness in the oil sector. The oil sector, may surprise people to know, is basically down to about 8% of the state's GDP. Okay, and so it's the story of Texas is one of diversification and migration of people and firms to the state. Our population growth statewide has outstripped the nation, and that's been going on for many, many years. And I think that trend is going to continue. So while challenges in the oil industry obviously are a headwind, there isn't 2 or 3 days that go by where I don't talk to somebody who runs a big business in the East Coast, West Coast, or in the upper Midwest who isn't thinking about moving here. And a lot of them have made the decision they are moving here. So I think Houston, as well as Dallas, obviously Austin, to some extent San Antonio, the whole state is gonna be benefited by this move to more migration of people and firms here and increasing diversification of our business base. So we can tolerate and manage through weakness in the oil sector and still grow and still do better than the country.
Well, speaking about growth, you talked earlier about the PPP program and what that did for families and others. We know there's another stimulus package on the table. Let's talk a little bit about the Main Street lending program and what you think that has done and will continue to do for our region.
So of all the programs we've done, Main Street is the most challenging, and we probably had a good idea it would be, and that we've done all these so-called 13-3 programs to help stabilize market function. And I think they've been very effective by and large, and that they've improved flows into private markets. We have record muni issuance, we have record corporate bond issuance, and it's being done away from the Fed. So we're a backstop and a penalty rate, and I think that's a healthy outcome. The PPP, although it had issues, has been effective. The Main Street program, let me tell you why it's been challenging. And a number of your bankers on this can attest to this. If you were a good credit when the pandemic started, you were able to go to your bank and get a loan. If you were a weaker credit, you probably weren't able to get a loan. The Main Street program has still tough EBITDA and other credit requirements. And the bank has to want to make the loan because they have to own 5% of the loan. And a number of bankers have said to me, if I have a good client or a new customer who comes to me and wants a loan and it's a good loan and good credit, I'd rather keep more than 5% of it. I want to do it away from Main Street. And so what's happening is unless the credit terms of Main Street are eased to where we, and this is really a Treasury decision and congressional decision, if we need to be willing to accept greater loan losses, it's going to be one of these things. It's not that companies aren't able to get loans, and small companies, they're getting loans, but why would you use this program? And a lot of the companies that want to use it are weaker credits or would rather do some type of, asset back, maybe they're hotels. Their EBITDA criteria don't really meet this. They need to use alternative standards. And this has been challenging to make them eligible for this program.
So we have a lot of folks on the call now who are representatives, executives from the airline industry, hotels, restaurants. What can you say to them as it relates to any relief that they may get?
So the Fed's job will be to, as best we can, make sure that capital markets are functioning and there's access to credit. And we are a lender of last resort, so we'll step in when we see that's not happening. In terms of aid to any specific industry, those decisions won't be made by the Fed. They need to be made by the Treasury and elected representatives. I talk to members of this industry literally every day, and the big conversation we're having is how long is this going to last? And I think they believe, and they're starting to believe, this will last longer than we originally thought. And then the question is, do they have leverage or are they unleveraged? And if they do have leverage, can they term out? So many of the airlines have termed out and they've gotten help directly from the federal government. But I think the challenge for all these industries is this is just a waiting game where I'm confident that when we look out 3 years from now, these businesses will bounce back. Obviously the world's changing, but they'll bounce back, but it's really getting from here to there and basically staying power to survive this and get through this very difficult period, which I think is going to go on for some period of time.
And that's why the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has worked very closely with our local, state, county elected officials and those who represent us in Washington, D.C., because they have the power to make the decisions on, what sectors and how much money they're going to put back into the economy to support, especially those small businesses that perhaps missed that first round of PPP money for a variety of reasons. And we just want to reiterate that we are so thankful to our local city and county elected officials who stepped up to the plate, Mr. Kaplan, and provided additional millions of dollars, whether it was for rent relief or for business loans that were either forgiven, et cetera, and make the process simple and easy. So we want to thank them for that. And I know they are having conversations about whether or not they can inject even more city and county funding to our region. So that all helps. It makes a difference. We're asking everyone on this call, do everything that you can to help advocate with your elected officials, especially those who are in Washington, D.C., to support the funding to keep our economy going and growing. Mr. Kaplan, please, anything else that we've not talked about that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so so we talked about small business. You just talked about aid to small business. That's very critical. Another round of the PPP, I think, would be very welcome and helping people get through this. But the other thing we're going to need to be talking about, and I know you are in Houston, is there's a lot of these workers I just talked about with high school educations and less will not have jobs to go back to. And because technology and technology-enabled disruption and remote work has accelerated, many of them will need to get retrained to get into new jobs. And so we spent a lot of time here at the Dallas Fed, and I know we spent a lot of time in Houston with the Greater Houston Partnership and others. There's going to have to be dramatic investment in beefed up skills training. There will be a premium on improving early childhood literacy, expanding pre-K from half day to full day, improving educational attainment, access to health, to childcare, I should say, is going to be a big issue. We talked about relating to women. All those areas will be essential as we go through this and we come out of it. Access to Wi-Fi in key areas that don't have it. Those are going to be key structural areas that are going to get people back to work faster and will help make sure we grow faster as we come out of this.
And all of those were already issues before COVID. Now they are just magnified and hopefully getting the sense of urgency they merit and deserve so we can in fact move forward. And we'd like to say is that in Houston, as Hispanics go, so goes Houston, because we represent over 42% of the population in our area, and we also represent over 53 billion, that is with a B, of consumer spending in the Houston region. And so we want to thank you for joining us today to provide an update and the state of the economy. We welcome your return to our program here and with our members. And just like to say again to everyone in the Houston area who's been involved with us at the Federal Reserve Bank for a long-standing partnership and relationship. And we look forward to going back into the facilities, working with you all on Money Week and having our young emerging leaders go through seminars and just a variety of other very important conversations at the Federal Reserve here in the Houston area. So our thanks to you.
Thank you, Laura, and great to talk with you, and thanks for all that you're doing.
Absolutely. For everyone who's joining us, a friendly reminder, we have videos from SBA. We also have videos from the Workforce Commission and a lot of resources on our website, HoustonHispanicChamber.com. Also on our YouTube channel, we have recorded messages, etc. There is a lot of help out there. Go forward, take a look at it, visit our website for resources and information. And remember, please wear your mask and make sure you vote. Get out and vote. Thank you, Robert Kaplan. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you,
Have
Laura.
a great day. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.